So a little bit more information about some of the questions that were asked earlier. Venerable Rinchen asked about the term Mahasattva, which appears in the Heart Sutra, Bodhisattva, talking about Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva. It's in other texts as well. So I looked through a number of commentaries to the Heart Sutra that I have, and only one explained that term. That was given by Geshe Ngowan Drokpa of Ling Center in San Francisco. So he said a Mahasattva is a bodhisattva who has attained one of the bhumis, one of the grounds. So that means it would be an Arya bodhisattva who's has a direct realization of emptiness. And then with regard to Tenzin's question, I looked up in this book, and yeah, there is some information on cultivating bodhicitta in Chinese Buddhism. It mentions, this is in what chapter? Chapter 8. So it mentions one text by Nagarjuna, which is called Treatise on the 10 Grounds. And that explains some things to meditate on, practice to generate bodhicitta. And then there's another text by a Chinese master whose name I probably won't pronounce properly, but it looks like Sheng An Shi Xian. He lived in the 18th century. He was a meditation master and Pure Land patriarch, and he wrote a text called Exhortation to Resolve on Buddhahood, and mentions, I think, 10 different things to meditate on to generate bodhicitta, and some of them are similar to the 7 causes and effects. One is mindfulness of the kindness of our parents, both our parents of this life and our parents in all our previous lives, and everybody else's parents as well. So the kindness of parents. And then another point is mindfulness of the kindness of sentient beings, how they've all been our loved ones in all our lifetimes, and so on. And so, yeah, there's some similar points. So I won't go through all the points, but yeah. So there are texts in the Chinese tradition on how to generate bodhicitta. Venerable Pende, did you have a question? You had your hand up this morning.
So I have 2 questions. Sorry of my voice. So can you share how you integrate the daily practice in your daily life? That's my first question.
You mean how to integrate
the daily practice?
Like bodhicitta practice?
No, like the forearm Chenrezig sana.
Oh,
Yeah.
And how to integrate that in your daily life? Well, I guess it depends on what level you're able to do the practice, and also whether or not you are doing the practice after having received an initiation, which qualifies you to visualize yourself as Chenrezig, and you can also visualize all other beings as Chenrezig and the environment as a Pure Land. So if you're able to do that practice, then I have to confess, I've always had difficulty doing that practice. So it's not something I'm very successful at, but that is one way of doing the practice. I guess another way would be just to contemplate that everyone has the potential. Every being has Buddha nature, so they have the potential to purify themselves, transform themselves, and attain the same qualities that Chenrezig has. So if you do have a lot of devotion and feel a strong connection with Chenrezig, then thinking that everyone is a potential Chenrezig, would help you to feel, more respectful, more accepting, not so likely to get angry and so on. Yeah, so those are just suggested things that one could do in daily life. And yeah, when you have a break, you could, just pause and remember the practice, remember Chenrezig, maybe recite some mantras. So there's different ways depending on one's ability.
Second question is from the Sana. I was wondering how, the the light from the mental image can purify all our impure karma and delusions.
So how is it possible for the light from Chenrezig to purify?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, any deity like Chenrezig is a manifestation of enlightened mind. So it's if we can understand what that means, enlightened mind, like I talked about this morning, the four kayas. So an enlightened mind has the ability to manifest or appear in many different forms. And so Chenrezig is one such form. So it's like an expression of enlightened mind in a form that we can see and relate to because it looks like us, with face and arms and so on. And so when we visualize Chenrezig and make prayers and recite mantras and so on, we are connecting with enlightened mind. And so when we visualize light, the light coming from Chenrezig is again an expression of enlightened mind. It's like all the qualities, all the realizations of Buddha's mind appearing in the form of light. And so we imagine that purifying us. To really purify our karma and our afflictions and so forth, we need to do more than just visualize light flowing through us. We need to have, right attitudes like regret, like the four powers in the purification practice. So we do need to regret negative actions that we've done and really want to free ourselves of them. And so there needs to be sincere regret and also refuge, strong refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and the strong wish to not repeat those actions again. So those need to be part of our mind. I don't know if we necessarily have to be thinking about them at the time that we're visualizing this light coming through, but in general, those are attitudes we need to cultivate with regard to our non-virtuous actions that we've done and afflictions in our mind and so on. We do need to have the wish to purify them, to get rid of them. And so we're imagining this light, which is again enlightened mind, Buddha's mind appearing in the form of light, kind of filling us and washing us out. So it's similar in the practice of Vajrasattva. That's also, you're visualizing Vajrasattva above your head, and then light is coming down and flushing out all the negative karma and all the negative things. So I once asked a teacher, I guess I had doubt about this practice of purification and how does it work that, just doing this visualization, how is that going to clear away your karma? And that particular teacher said, it's really refuge. It's your refuge that purifies you. It's that state of mind of relying upon the Buddha, in this case in the form of Chenrezig, really seeing the excellent qualities and having devotion and relying, putting yourself under their guidance and care. Those states of mind are really what purify you. So I think just visualizing Chenrezig and light and saying the mantra wouldn't purify you if you didn't have the right state of mind, you didn't have the right attitude. So it's mainly your mind, your attitude that is what purifies. That's how I understand it. Does that make sense? And also with the 35 Buddhas, when you're doing the 35 Buddha practice, you're also visualizing these Buddhas, and then you visualize light flowing from them and flushing out. So it's similar. So it's really our mind and our attitudes, our wish to purify, our wish to transform ourselves. That's the main thing, I think, that purifies. And these are just additional methods that help us feel we are purifying ourselves, and it is possible to purify ourselves. Yeah.
I was wondering, so I've never come across that bodhicitta has been kind of been based on love instead of compassion. So I was wondering, whether you know why, because yeah, at some point you also mentioned in your teachings that love and compassion can be seen as like two sides of a coin. So, and sometimes, I do connect more with love instead of compassion, especially if I already kind of feel a little bit lower. And I was wondering whether whether one could generate bodhicitta also from love, because for me it doesn't seem to be a contradiction, but I just want to...
Well, I mean, love is one of the factors that we need to develop for bodhicitta, but I don't know if love alone would be enough to lead you to that state of mind. That's because you do have to be aware of the suffering. Yeah, you have to have awareness that sentient beings are suffering, and that gives strong energy. Yeah, if you do it right, it gives you a lot of energy to want to help them. They do need help. So we need to recognize that they need help. And to be able to help them, we need to develop these qualities in ourselves, like bodhicitta and wisdom and so on. So I'm not sure if love alone would give that same kind of energy to follow the path. I mean, it's certainly there. It's certainly a part of the path. But if you could do it with love alone, without compassion, I don't know if that's what you're asking, but yeah. Yeah.
I think it's not, for me, it's not either or, but I just feel like sometimes maybe having a stronger emphasis on love instead of compassion, not excluding compassion, but more having kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I seem to recall something, I'll look it up later, but something that Lama Tsongkhapa said in his commentary to Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka about love. And I think, I'll check to be sure, but I think he said something like, having love for sentient beings is, of course, very positive, but when it comes to enemies, people who've harmed you, people you don't like, then, instead of loving them and wanting them to be happy, you may want them to suffer instead. And so he explains that is why it's important to generate compassion. But I'll look it up and see what exactly he said. But there was some explanation in there about why compassion is important in addition to love. And they do say that when it comes to the order of love and compassion, there's no fixed order. So you can, first start by cultivating love and then later compassion, or the other way around, cultivate compassion and then love. So they don't have a fixed order, but they do both. Both are required to develop all the qualities that we need to be able to progress. But I think, if you feel more inclined at this point in time to meditate on love, then I think that's fine. And maybe put compassion aside until later. Okay, so let's look at the second method for generating bodhicitta. There's some slides with it. This one is called Equalizing and Exchanging Self and Others. And the lineage, lineage, is from Buddha to Manjushri, the Buddha of Wisdom, and Nagarjuna, Shantideva, and so on. Those are Indian masters, down to Atisha, who brought these teachings to Tibet. And the reason that I focused more on the other method in this retreat was because recently Venerable Children has been teaching Shantideva's text, The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, and that this particular method is explained in that text. So I think the people here in the Abbey have had lots of teachings on this particular method, right? Very extensive. Yeah. But some of you who weren't here for those teachings didn't have that. But they're on YouTube. You can always watch those. So I'll just go through these kind of briefly. So there's 5 points. The first is equalizing oneself and others. And it's kind of similar to equanimity, the first point in the other method. But there's some difference. When we meditate on equanimity, the goal is to even out the way we feel towards other beings, friends, enemies, and strangers, to make our feelings towards them even, rather than having attachment for some and aversion for others, and then kind of uncaring indifference for others. So we're trying to, balance our feelings towards them. That's the main point of equanimity in the other method. And here, equalizing oneself and others, this is to overcome our tendency to consider ourselves more important than others, as if we were the center of the universe, more important than anybody else. And so we do this by realizing that every other being has the same wish that we have, to be happy and not suffer. So in this book, In Praise of Great Compassion, His Holiness says, equanimity levels the playing field, equanimity levels the playing ground of friend, enemy, and stranger, and equalizing self and others levels it between us and others. So we're equalizing, oneself and others. So the main contemplation is that every other being wants to be happy and not suffer just as we do. Now, some teachers do talk about that as well in the context of equanimity, and it's actually mentioned in here. So sometimes that is also contemplated when you're meditating on equanimity, just to realize your friends, your enemies, and strangers, and you are all the same in wanting happiness and not suffer. But the main goal of that meditation is to work on your emotions, how you feel towards others, to reduce or deal with attachment, aversion, and indifference. And one thing that the Dalai Lama recommends with this is to imagine, in meditation, imagine yourself on one side, and then all other sentient beings on the other side, and then looking at those two, asking yourself, whose well-being is more important? The well-being of this one person, or the well-being of all other beings? So he says you can contemplate that, and either you can be the judge of that, or you can imagine everybody voting. So who would win the vote? Would all those sentient beings vote that you are the most important? Probably not. And so basically in this, when meditating on this point, you just bring to mind, it's good to bring to mind individuals rather than just a big mass of people. So individual people, and then contemplate, this person just wants to be happy like me, doesn't want to suffer like me. And then the next person, and so on. And there's also a more elaborate way of meditating that Trikang Rinpoche, one of the Dalai Lama's teachers, the junior tutor of the Dalai Lama, he taught this, and I won't go into the details, but it's in the book. So it's going through 9 different points, looking at this idea in different ways. For example, you ask yourself if you were a doctor and there was 10 patients sitting in your waiting room and they all had the same sickness, they're all suffering from flu or whatever, would it be right to give more attention to one of the patients and not the others? So just points like that, different ways of contemplating this idea of how we are all equal. And this meditation should help us recognize our attitude of self-centeredness, how we do have this tendency to regard ourselves as more important than others, in case we haven't already noticed that, but, just to become more aware of that. And how that's, ask ourselves, is it really right to have that attitude? And then the next point picks up from there. The next point is the disadvantages of cherishing oneself. So here we so the usual term that's used is self-cherishing. In traditional texts, in the Tibetan tradition, you come across this term self-cherishing, but that term is a little bit problematic because this expression self-cherishing is something negative. It's something we want to get rid of. So it almost sounds like we shouldn't cherish ourselves. We shouldn't care about ourselves. We shouldn't regard ourselves as important. Like, just trash yourself. It almost sounds like that. Maybe it doesn't sound like that to Tibetans, but I think for Western people, many of us do have critical, negative attitudes towards ourselves. So we hear, get rid of your self-cherishing. You've got this self-cherishing attitude. It's really bad. It's really wrong. So we may equate it with, or we may hear that and think, oh, that means I should trash myself. I should beat myself up and hate myself and so on. So it can be a little confusing. So instead of that term, preferable terms would be just self-centeredness or selfishness or self-importance. I think if we use terms like that, it's more clear that we're talking about a not very good attitude, not a healthy attitude. And in fact, we should care about ourselves. It is important to value ourselves and care for ourselves, but not exclusively only caring about ourselves and not caring about others, or caring about ourselves more than others. So that's what we're trying to target. That's kind of the main target of this particular method of developing bodhicitta. It's that tendency to regard ourselves as more important than others. And so the second point is looking at the faults or disadvantages of that kind of attitude that says, I am more important, and being selfish. So there's different ways we could do that. We could think about problems in the world or problems in society, like war, crime, terrorism, injustice, and so on, and then examine what lies behind these problems. Why do people do these things? Why do they make war? Why do they murder and rape and rob and so on? So if we do that, if we examine that, then we'll probably notice the selfishness, a selfish attitude on the part of those who are committing those actions. Yeah, they're thinking about me and maybe also us, my group, my country, my family, whatever. So caring more for oneself and one's group and not caring about others, even to the extent of inflicting horrendous suffering on them. So that way we can see some of the adverse effects of selfishness, self-centeredness. But then we also need to look at ourselves, so we can look at our own life and bring to mind actions that we've done that we recognize as harmful and we feel regret for, really awful, nasty things that we did earlier in our life, and ask, what led me to do those things? And we'll probably find a number of different factors, but most probably self-centeredness is one of them. We care more about ourselves, what I want, what I need, what's good for me, even to the extent of harming others to get what we want, or inflicting our ideas on others, manipulating others, and so on. So we need to sort of explore our experience as well as the world around us to recognize this attitude of self-centeredness and the kind of problems that it can lead to. And another thing we can contemplate is if you accept karma, if you can accept that actions we do at one point in time lead to results we experience at another point in time. So if that makes sense to you, then whatever problems or difficulties or unpleasant experiences we have in this lifetime were caused by actions that we did in former lives, or maybe in the earlier part of this life, negative, harmful actions, and what motivated us to do those actions, what led us to do those actions. Again, if we explore, analyze the mind, we can find self-centeredness. I was totally caught up in my own I, ego, me, what I want, what I need, and disregarded others and just acted out what I thought was good for me. So just to recognize that the self-centered attitude, the selfish attitude, leads us and leads other people to do negative actions. And those negative actions usually they bring short-term problems, kind of immediate problems, but they also bring long-term problems because of karma. Imprints are left on our mind, and then those ripen later in another life and bring all kinds of unfortunate experiences. And we can also look at experiences in this life like relationship problems we've had with other people, with our parents, with kids at school, with teachers, with colleagues, with bosses and partners and so on, kids if you're a parent. And yeah, whenever there's been a relationship problem, looking into your mind and see if you can recognize selfishness, self-centeredness, if that was a part of this problem. And there's a good chance you will recognize it, that you were, fixed on yourself, obsessed with yourself and what you want, and not caring that much about the other person. So these are ways in which we can recognize the problems caused by this self-centered, selfish attitude. Also, if we look into emotional problems that we may have, such as getting depressed or things like self-hatred, self-criticalness, even though it may look like we're not being selfish in those situations, when we're in those states of mind, but if we check carefully, we'll probably notice there is a kind of obsessiveness about me. I'm depressed because I don't like the way that I am. I want to be different, or I think everybody doesn't like me. So it's kind of very much preoccupied with me. Like, again, it's I am the center of everything. I am the most important person. And yeah, that can get really distorted into even hating ourselves or thinking I'm the worst person in the world. But, we're still really obsessed with me. And there's a lack of concern about others. And then when it comes to Dharma practice, especially this particular path, the Bodhisattva path, the Mahayana path, if we do feel attracted to that and want to follow that path and become enlightened to help all living beings, self-centeredness is a huge obstacle to that. We're trying to cultivate this incredible love, compassion, generosity, and so on, focused on others. And it said that, I'm certainly not there yet, but a bodhisattva is willing to give everything they have to others. They don't have attachment to their own belongings and even their own body. There's lots of stories about Buddha in his past life when he was a bodhisattva following the path, and he would even give parts of his body or even his whole body, give his life to benefit others. They say we shouldn't do that unless we're really, we have really strong compassion and bodhicitta. But we can give parts of our body, like blood, or some people donate organs to benefit someone who needs that organ. But yeah, self-centeredness holds us back from that kind of activity that would be so beneficial for others. So, yeah, we need to recognize that it's a big obstacle on the path to attaining, especially to the Bodhisattva path and attaining enlightenment. And also when it comes to our practice, meditating, learning, whatever kind of practice we may be doing, it's possible that our motivation for doing practice may not be 100% pure and altruistic, but, I want to get something. What's in it for me? What am I going to get out of it? People will like me. I'll become a teacher, and then people will, praise me and listen to me and respect me, and I'll become famous. So it's very hard not to have some sense of ego in our motivation for the things that we do. But if we notice that, we shouldn't beat ourselves up because it's just normal. We are sentient beings. We are not enlightened beings, and we're probably not even bodhisattvas. So we do still have self-centeredness in our mind, and it's going to take a long time before we're completely free of that. So be thankful that you notice it and that you have some tools with which to reduce that attitude and learn to be more altruistic. So it's a gradual process. You can't expect immediately to be totally unselfish, but just recognizing that state of mind is already helpful. Yeah, I remember once I was leading a retreat, and one woman who came to this retreat asked to talk to me privately, and during this talk, she started crying because she said she'd been working in education, teaching children, and she really enjoyed her work. And she thought that her attitude, her motivation for teaching was, was altruistic, was for the benefit of her students. But during this retreat, because she was meditating more and listening to the teaching, she realized that part of her motivation was selfish, like she wanted to be loved. She wanted attention from her students. So she was really upset when she noticed that and was kind of beating herself up. I said, yeah, well, just be thankful that you became aware of that, because it's probably been there a long time, and probably many other people have it as well. I mean, most people do have that sense of wanting attention, wanting to be liked, wanting to be approved of, and so on. So it's really normal to be that way, but they don't realize it. They don't notice it. So the fact that you're noticing it in yourself is already an important step. And then it's just a question of being mindful of that, trying not to feed that, perpetuate that, but instead counteract it. And there are methods we can use to do that. So anyway, that's what we do in this second point, is just getting familiar with how this attitude of self-centeredness, self-importance, is counterproductive. It's not helpful. You know, we might think it's helpful, but we need to question that. Does it really help me? Is it really good for me? And look at all these problems that it creates for us. It motivates us to do actions, negative actions that produce negative karma, produce suffering for the future, keeps us in samsara, prevents us from attaining enlightenment. So we're building a case against the self-centered attitude, just like a lawyer, right? Building up a case, all these things that are problematic with that attitude. And then with the third point, the advantages of cherishing others. So here we do the opposite. We look at the opposite state of mind, that of cherishing others, or also could be called altruism. So this unselfish care and concern for others. So in Shantideva's text, he says it quite strongly. He says, whatever worldly suffering there is arises from wishing for your own happiness. In other words, just being totally focused on yourself. Me, I just want to be happy. And then he says, whatever worldly joy there is arises from wishing for others' happiness. So there's numerous quotations like that in various texts about how the self-centered attitude is really the source of all suffering, all problems. And the opposite attitude of cherishing others or altruism, that is the source of all happiness. And so for point number 3, we can again look at our own experiences in life, and if you can accept karma, if karma makes sense to you, then the good things we have in this life are the result of virtue, good karma that we created in past lives. And when good karma is created, it's done on the basis of cherishing others. So we can go through, for example, the list of there's a list of 10 non-virtuous actions, killing, stealing, and so on. And then there's a list of 10 virtuous actions, which involve making a conscious effort to refrain from the 10 non-virtuous actions. So in other words, we create virtue by consciously, deliberately refraining from killing, making that determination. I'm not going to kill. I'm not going to take life. I'm not going to steal. I'm not going to commit sexual misconduct. I'm not going to tell lies or speak harsh words or slander, divisive speech or gossip, idle talk. I'm not going to indulge in covetousness, harmful intent, and wrong views. So understanding those 10 non-virtuous actions and recognizing, those are the cause of suffering, and I want to refrain from those, I want to avoid those, and really trying your best to live that way in your life. Not killing, not stealing, and so on. So that's how you create virtue. And so there's results in the teachings. It explains the different results of creating that kind of virtue. So for example, not killing, if we consciously, deliberately refrain from killing, then the karmic result of that is being born with a healthy body, being healthy, and also having a long life. Yeah. So if that's something you're experiencing in this life, so far anyway, I can say that. I reached 71, so not everybody lives this long, and I've been pretty healthy. So we can attribute that to creating the karma in a past life of not killing, refraining from killing. And then if we refrain from stealing, the karmic result is having resources, having enough money, whatever you need to survive, rather than being destitute and homeless and impoverished and so on. So the point is, every good thing we experience in this present life, the good conditions that we have, are the result of karma that we created in past lives. And if we look at, what kind of karma leads to what kind of results, then we can understand what we probably did in past lives. And if we look at why we did those things, we can find cherishing of others, like refraining from killing is understanding that people and other beings don't want to be killed, don't want to have that suffering. And so out of respect for them, cherishing of them, we consciously refrain from killing. And the same with stealing. We understand that people value their belongings and they suffer if they're taken away. And so out of respect and not wanting to make them suffer, we refrain from that. So the point is that if we have this attitude of cherishing others, caring for others, not wanting to make them suffer and wanting to make them happy, that motivates good karma, virtuous karma, which then is the cause for good experiences in future lives. So in this life, we are enjoying the results of that, what we did in past lives. And in this life, if we continue in that way and create virtue, refrain from non-virtue, then, and again, it's involved with self-cherishing. Involved with cherishing others. But then some people might say, but I'm also concerned about myself. I don't want to suffer. If I kill, I will suffer too. Well, that's true. But just refraining from killing only out of consideration for oneself is kind of very narrow. And, it's much more meaningful if we also think about others and don't want to make them suffer. Yeah. But out of consideration both for oneself and for others, then we refrain from non-virtuous actions. Does that make sense? And then we can also see the benefits of altruism, not just thinking about past lives and future lives and karma, but just in the world. Like all the acts of compassion, humanitarianism, when we hear about those or we observe those, I think we probably feel admiration rather than, what a stupid thing to do, what a waste of time. Right? Like when there's a natural disaster, which is happening a lot, hurricanes and floods and forest fires and what else? Earthquakes, all these things that happen, and people's homes are destroyed and their lives are in danger, and there's always this outpour of gifts and help for them, Sometimes people will deliberately fly to that place, go to that place in order to help the victims, the people who are suffering. And money is donated and all these aid organizations go in, like World Central Kitchen. I love that. You're the one who introduced that World Central Kitchen, this famous Spanish chef who's Chef Jose. Yeah, he started this organization. And whenever there's a disaster or war like in Ukraine, they mobilize money, of course, they have money, but they get people to prepare meals and package them and then just go to these places and distribute them. It's just amazing what they do. It's so beautiful. And water and whatever else is needed. But there's lots of organizations that do that.
Chef Andre.
Andre. Okay. Yeah, Chef. Hmm?
It's Jose Andreas.
Jose Andre. Okay. Great guy. And he himself is involved, right? He sometimes goes in there and hands out food. Yeah, so that's just one example of many, so many. And so I think we all feel good when we hear about these kind of actions and also make contributions if we can. But just imagine how it would be if there was an earthquake or a flood or a fire and nobody went to help those people. I mean, it would be awful, especially if you were one of the people whose house got washed away or flooded or whatever. So, yeah. So that kind of activity of helping those in need comes from this state of mind of cherishing others. People willing to share their resources and even their time, to go in those places and do the work of helping those in need. So I think when we hear those stories or observe acts of kindness and compassion like that, we feel good. Like, this is how things should be. This is a good thing to do. So that's another way we can recognize the benefits, the advantages, the value of that attitude of cherishing others. And then in terms of our practice, Dharma practice, especially in this path of the Bodhisattva path, working for enlightenment, it's especially important to have this attitude. If we are totally 100% focused on just me and not caring about others, then there's no way we could be successful in following this path. So it's an essential element of the Bodhisattva's path to generate this attitude of cherishing others. And I mean, we do have it. It's something that's already there. We all do sometimes have altruism and are willing to put ourselves out and even make sacrifices to help others and take care of others. So it's just a question of increasing that attitude. So then the fourth point is exchanging oneself with others. And this arises on the basis of the previous 3 points, having familiarized oneself with how everyone is equal in their wish for happiness and to not suffer. We all feel the same way about that. And then points 2 and 3 are kind of like comparing the two attitudes. One is self-centeredness, feeling I am more important than others. I am the center of the universe. So that attitude, and the other attitude of caring for others, altruism, cherishing others. So we're kind of comparing those two, weighing those two, the pros and cons. I don't know if we can find any pros of self-centeredness. I mean, people might think, well, I get stuff. I get, if I take care of myself, then I get lots of stuff. Well, yeah, but what about happiness? Do you really feel good about yourself? Do you really have genuine, deep happiness and satisfaction, even if you have all this stuff? But maybe you don't have any friends, nobody to enjoy it with. Is that really how you want to live your life? And then the attitude of cherishing others, looking at pros and cons. I don't know if there's any cons of that attitude. Some people might think, well, if you take care of others, then you miss out, or you're stupid. I heard of this, there was this writer named Ayn Rand. Have you ever heard of her? I'm not completely sure about her story, but I heard that she was really down on altruism and wrote books about it and so on. What was her point? What was wrong with, according to her, what's wrong with altruism?
I would say that her perspective was not necessarily what we would call altruism, but that idea that somehow when people are caring about others, then individuals have less freedom, and that people have their talents denied. And that was kind of this idea that, you know, kind of in the service of the greater good, individuals are pulled down and, you know, bad decisions get made. And
And I think it had to do with her background. Wasn't she from Russia?
yeah, she was from Russia.
Yeah, so just seeing
But so
communism, the results of communism, yeah.
yeah, like one of her shorter books was basically, you know, the premise was like the word I didn't even exist anymore. It was just this collective we. And, you know, again, that was like this dystopic view. So again, yeah, kind of communism taken to a nightmare level. And so that was kind of, yeah. Again, she I don't think she has our view of altruism at all.
Yeah, we're not talking about communism here. Although the Dalai Lama did, you know, I think when he heard about communism, he did feel some admiration for at least the socialist views of some of the early Marxism. Yeah. Okay. I don't fully understand all of that, but yeah, the idea of caring for everybody and trying to make everybody equal, because there was quite a bit of disparity in Tibet. I mean, there were the nobles, the wealthy people, there were the serfs, there were homeless people, beggars, and so on. So I think he did care about everybody and wanted to bring more equality, and I think felt that Marxist ideas, yeah, socialist ideas were valuable from that point of view. But then looking at what happened in Russia and China and so forth, then he changed his mind. He was no longer in favor of that movement. Anyway, we're talking here about our own mind. We can't change the minds of others, but we can change our own mind, our own attitudes. And so ideally, we need to really contemplate these points, first 1, 2, and 3 points. And then hopefully we will reach the conclusion that cherishing others is a better way to go than being selfish and self-centered. And that's the meaning of the 4th point. The 4th point is where you reach that conviction, seeing the results of those 2 states of mind, you decide, I want to change my mind, change my attitude, change my priorities, and have cherishing of others rather than self-centeredness. So I'm going to bring about that change in my mind. And I mean, we need to be realistic. It's not something we can just do overnight, but slowly we can work on changing our focus and learn to be more altruistic and less selfish. But we need to decide to do that. We have to put effort into it. It isn't going to just happen naturally. And even though we might feel convinced of that, there might still be some doubts or resistance in our mind. And Shantideva in his text talks about some of these, addresses some of these, and answers them. One possible doubt we may have is, I'm just so selfish. I've been this way all my life, and I can't change. Some people might think that way, that it's not possible to be less selfish and more altruistic. So if that comes up in our mind, then we can contemplate that, well, it is difficult to stop being selfish, but not impossible. And what could be helpful would be to contemplate the nature of the mind. We didn't talk so much about that here, but there's lots of teachings about the nature of the mind being basically clear and pure, and it's a nice analogy is that it's like the sky. Not today, but some days, when there's no clouds in the sky is just vast and clear and spacious, and the clouds or pollution, whatever is in the sky, that's temporary, transitory, not permanent. So the clouds come and go, but the pure spaciousness of the sky remains. It's always there. So in a similar way, the nature of our mind is clear and pure, and defilements or afflictions like ignorance, greed, hatred, selfishness, and so on, these are temporary, transitory, not permanent. They're like the clouds or the pollution that come and go. So that's a very important thing to contemplate and try to be convinced of. And even if you have doubt about that, you could just look at your own experience and how there are times when we may be angry, times when we're selfish, times when we're greedy, but we're not like that all the time. Those are temporary, transitory states of mind that come and go. They're not there 24/7 every moment, but they come and go. So we can see for ourselves just by looking at our experience that these afflicted states of mind are transitory rather than permanent. And if we do start working on antidotes, meditating on antidotes to afflictions, we can see that they get reduced. Yeah. And then we can feel, well, if I keep working on this, I keep meditating on these, I can reduce them more and more and more and more and get rid of them altogether. So another quote from Shantideva, I forget which chapter this is in, but he says, "There's nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance." So in other words, by getting familiar with, getting habituated to something, it gets easier. So in the beginning, it may be hard to, give up selfishness and be more altruistic. But the more we do it, the more we practice that, then it does get easier. And we'll probably find that it feels better. Yeah, we're more satisfied with ourselves rather than feeling guilty. So those are some things we can contemplate in case our mind comes up with that objection that I can't change. I will be selfish forever and ever and ever. I'm hopeless. So don't buy into that. Don't believe in that. Another doubt that might come up is thinking something like, why should I help others? Their suffering doesn't harm me, and their happiness doesn't benefit me. So if others are happy or they are not happy, so what? Doesn't bother me. I think it's good to question that. If you're in the presence of somebody who's in pain or really unhappy, crying, can you really feel happy, enjoy yourself, relax? Yeah. Is it really possible to be happy while someone else is unhappy unless you just totally shut yourself off from others? But then again, are you going to be happy like that? And others' happiness, when others are happy, doesn't that affect us? Doesn't that bring joy to us? So I think if we examine that, we do find that, what other people are experiencing, other beings are experiencing, does affect us. And so if others could have greater happiness and less suffering, we would be happier too. That would be good for us. And Dalai Lama always talks about, I think he learned this from talking with Western scientists, that human beings are social animals. It's very hard for anybody to live completely alone and disconnected from others. We need others. We thrive in community, in relationships with others to find meaning and joy in life. And so if we are with others, then it makes sense that we do what we can to make them happy and do what we can to relieve their suffering, because it does affect us. It is something that will affect us. So it's just not reasonable to think that what's going on with others doesn't affect us. I think Shantideva addresses that in his text, doesn't he? I may be using different words, but that general idea. Another doubt that might come up: if I cherish others, who will take care of me? If I completely dedicate myself and help others, take care of others, then what will happen to me? Who will take care of me? So part of that is not understanding what it means to cherish others. Cherishing others doesn't mean we neglect ourselves. We don't take care of ourselves. We don't eat and sleep and bathe and so on. So we do still take care of ourselves, but we're even in those times when we are taking care of ourselves, we can still do that with an altruistic intention, like eating. We're encouraged here, and it's part of the prayers that we recite, that when we're eating food, we think of it as medicine to nourish our body and keep ourselves alive and give ourselves energy so that we can continue with our Dharma practice and benefit others. So while taking care of ourselves, it doesn't have to be like totally selfish, self-centered, just about me, but we can connect taking care of ourselves with altruism and taking care of others. So we do continue looking after ourselves, but we do it with a new perspective, rather than just only caring for myself, but caring for myself so that I can help others. Does that make sense? And also, I think if we are a person who, really trying sincerely to generate this attitude of compassion and cherishing others and really working to help others, others will like us. We will be liked. That was one of the benefits. When we went through the benefits of loving kindness, one of the benefits is that we will be cherished and helped and protected by others. Yeah. And I think we can see that here in the Abbey, right? The Abbey doesn't, people here in the Abbey don't go to the supermarket and buy food. We depend on donations from other people, and we get plenty, more than we need. So that shows that if we are really living our life trying to practice the Dharma and develop this attitude of altruism and cherishing others and so on, people will appreciate what we are doing and will be happy to take care of us. So I don't think there's any need to worry that we're going to starve or, be out in the cold. Okay, so that's the fourth point. And then the fifth point is taking and giving, or Tonglen. This is the famous Tonglen practice that Amy's been asking about. Well, so it comes in this method, and so the reason or purpose of doing Tonglen practice is to bring about this change in our mind, reversing our usual attitude from being self-centered to cherishing others. So it's not easy to do that, but the practice of Tonglen is a practice that can help bring about that change in our mind. So there's different ways of practicing Tonglen. Some are quite complex, but others are more simple. So basically, if you haven't heard of this before, Tonglen, or taking and giving, involves first thinking about the suffering of others, generating compassion for them, and generating the wish that you could take away their suffering, that you could remove their suffering, and generating the willingness to take it into yourself. So that's the taking part of the practice. It's motivated by compassion, done in connection with compassion. Willing to take the suffering of others into yourself and experience it so they don't have to experience it. And the usual way of doing the meditation is to, once you've thought about the suffering and you've generated this wish to take it away, you imagine the suffering as something like smoke or fog, and it's coming out from, in the beginning, it's probably best to just do it with one person rather than a whole group of people, but you can think of a person, probably best to start with someone you know who is suffering, relative or friend who's sick or going through some difficulty, so you can imagine them there in front of you. Think about their suffering and feel the strong wish that you could take it away from them. And then you imagine the suffering coming out of them in the form of like smoke or fog and comes into yourself. You can do it with the breath, breathing it in, but in the beginning, you can just imagine it coming in. You don't have to do it with the breath. And then you imagine at your heart chakra, your self-centered attitude, this selfish attitude that's you've already recognized as a big obstacle and something you want to overcome. You visualize it in some kind of form, like a lump, a black lump. Sometimes I think of the Rock of Gibraltar, it's like really big and strong. You can use your own imagination. Whatever. Oh, then when I heard about black holes, I thought that would be a good one too. Think of it as a black hole, taking in all this suffering and it just disappears. So whatever. So the suffering of the other comes into this self-centered attitude at your heart and annihilates it. It makes it non-existent. And the suffering also gets annihilated. So it's not that you take on this suffering and then you're burdened with all the suffering that you've taken on. But you imagine that goes as well, that disappears as well. And then the giving part is that's done in conjunction with love, wishing others to have happiness. So again, you can, with the same person that you took the suffering from, you think of what they need in order to be happy and generate this strong wish to give them those things that they need to be happy. And you can elaborate on that. In addition to food and clothes and shelter, temporary things, you can think of long-term things like virtue and good rebirths and realizations up to enlightenment. All the things that will enable this person to have real, lasting happiness. And then you think of your own good karma, your good qualities, your resources, all the good things you have, and you imagine those. I like to think of a jewel, a beautiful, sparkling jewel in my heart, like a wish-fulfilling jewel. And then light radiates from that and becomes all the things that the other person needs for their happiness. And you imagine sending that to them, giving them those things for their happiness. And you imagine them receiving those things, having those things, enjoying those things, being happy. So that's the basic idea of taking and giving. And it's probably best to start with one person at a time. And, best to start with a friend, someone you already have good feelings for. And then you can think of another person, another friend. Then when you're more familiar with doing it with friends, people you have good feelings for, then you can do it with strangers, people you don't know, don't have feelings for. And then with more familiarity, you can do it with enemies, difficult people. So you can do it gradually in that way. And they do say that in the beginning, if it's difficult for you to do it with others, if you feel strong resistance to taking the suffering of others, which is quite understandable. I have met people who right from the beginning, as soon as they hear about this practice, they jump into it. They love it. They have no problem with it. But other people are like, do I have to do that? So everyone's different. And if you do feel some, resistance and reluctance to do this, then they say a good place to start is with yourself, your own suffering. And I learned to practice a very kind of simple way of doing this practice that I think is very helpful. And you use a problem that you have. So when you're experiencing some kind of problem, it could be something small, you stub your toe, you have a little ache or pain here or there, a little bit of disappointment. So start with some small problem. And what normally happens when we have a problem is there's a lot of aversion and resistance. Oh, I don't like this. I don't want this. Go away. Leave me alone. We want to get rid of it. So instead of doing that, we can use it in this practice. And it's quite simple. And once you learn how to do it, you can do it just within a couple of minutes. You think, I'm not the only person in the world who has this kind of problem. Lots of other people have a similar problem. And some have it even worse than me. And just contemplate that. Think about all the other people or beings who got that kind of problem too. And then generate compassion for them, thinking how nice it would be if they could be free of this problem. They don't want it, just like I don't want it. Wouldn't it be nice if they could be free of this problem? And then you just say to yourself, I will accept this problem, my suffering, my problem, whatever it is, I accept it. And by my accepting it, may all those other people be free of theirs. So you don't even have to imagine taking suffering from them, but you just think, this experience that I'm going through right now, by that, may everyone else be free of this suffering. So you're giving a meaning, a significance, a value to your problem instead of seeing it as something you just want to throw away and get rid of. There's something valuable in having this problem, if you think of it in this way, using it to generate compassion and wishing others to be relieved of that suffering. So that's kind of a nice, simple practice. And like I say, once you learn it, you can do it just quickly. And you don't have to be sitting on a meditation cushion anytime, anywhere. You can, just by changing your thought, just saying those things to yourself. So there's lots of different ways to practice Tonglen. And each person can, according to your mind and your ability and what you feel comfortable doing, then you can do a more elaborate way or a more simple way. And it might be good to do it progressively. Like in the beginning, just work with your own problems, your own suffering. Get used to taking those on. Then gradually, when you're more comfortable with that, you can start doing it with others and start with one person at a time, someone you already love, somebody you already care about. Because, this kind of attitude arises naturally in people. Not being a parent myself, I don't have that experience, but if you're a parent and your child is sick or your child is unhappy, you might feel, I would rather that problem, I would like to take that problem myself so that my child doesn't have to experience it. Have you ever felt that way? Yeah. Or with your parents, if you really love your parents, or a friend, or your pet, and you just find it so unbearable that they are suffering, and you may even wish, may that suffering come to me instead of them having to have it. So when you really love and care about someone, then that kind of thought, that kind of feeling arises naturally. So that's the basic idea in Tonglen. We're learning to cultivate that way of thinking. And so it's said that this practice is a really helpful way of counteracting self-centeredness and acquainting ourselves with the opposite attitude of altruism, cherishing others. Because our self-centered mind selfishness says, I don't want to suffer. Don't give me any suffering. Don't give me any trouble. So we're just completely going against that, but in a meaningful way. It's not like we're looking for trouble, but we are feeling this compassion for others and the willingness to take away their suffering and even experience it ourselves so they don't have to have it. And, probably all of us at certain times have that kind of attitude. Like if there's some job that needs to be done, nobody wants to do it, cleaning the toilets or washing the dishes or whatever. And if you say, I'll do it, and you do it, with genuine joy, I'm happy to do that. Let everybody else enjoy themselves, but I'll do it. So we probably all had moments where we felt that way, where we were willing to take on some job, some task, some difficult situation to relieve others from having to do that. So similar idea. So I think the seed is there. The seed of being able to do this practice is there in our mind. So we're cultivating that seed by doing this sort of practice. So maybe tonight's session of meditation, who's leading? Would you like to do Tonglen practice?
I found this practice extremely powerful in two particular situations. First, anytime I've got some sort of illness going on, I don't want to go into self-pity. And so just imagining everybody in the world, let's say, lung problems or whatever, asthma. Think of everybody that not only has asthma, but emphysema and lung. I mean, you really pull out the stops on the suffering that has to do with your life's breath. And it's amazing how by taking that on, the whole sense of, I have a problem, absolutely goes up in smoke. And I've done this over the years, over and over again. I have found it to be one of the most powerful medicines. Mm-hmm. The second one is anytime I hear a siren, or we're on the path of the flight for life down to Sacred Heart, the helicopter that takes off of our little hospital has got a little, pad on the top of it. I've heard that helicopter twice in the past 2 weeks. Every time I hear that helicopter coming up over the ridge, I know that somebody's life has changed in some way. And I just take a moment and just take on whatever's going on with that person that's inside that helicopter, inside that ambulance, and just wish them well, wish them have all the resources, the medical care, the strength, the courage, the support, and just to take that on. And I have found that to be able to, it has increased my ability to hold suffering in a little bit bigger perspective than I used to be able to.
Yeah, I have to confess, I don't always remember to do it, but when I do that practice, it really changes your mind. From being miserable, poor me, how can I get rid of this problem, to being, wow, because the focus is away from me and it's on others. And even the Dalai Lama tells this story. There was a time in India when he had severe pain in his abdomen. What was it, I think it was gallstones. And he was supposed to be teaching. I was there waiting for these teachings, and he had to cancel the teachings, and they took him to a hospital. And it meant going by car for several hours through the Indian countryside and little villages and so on. So he was sitting in the car in great pain. But he said he was looking out the window and seeing all this poverty, little children dressed in rags, playing in the dirt, skinny, and elderly people lying on the ground, nobody to take care of them, and just, so many signs of suffering. And focusing on them and their suffering and feeling compassion for them, he just forgot about his pain. His pain, became less, or at least he became less aware of his pain. So, yeah, it's definitely helpful. Not to say that we shouldn't try to seek medical care when we do have sickness or pain or other solutions to our problem. We can still try to solve our problems, but they may not go away immediately. They may be there for a while. And while they are there, then this kind of practice is very helpful, very effective, and it's virtuous. Doing this kind of mental activity and visualization and so on, we're creating virtue, very, very powerful virtue, which is the cause for our progress on the path to enlightenment.
Venerable, they always say on the plane, like you put the mask on first before you put on the child or anyone. What's the karma created then? I'm always very puzzled over that.
Well, I mean, if you're a mom and you've got your baby sitting on your lap and the masks drop down, if you put the mask on the baby first, you might, pass out, and then you're not going to be able to help your baby. So that's the idea, isn't it? Isn't that the idea? So it's not about selfishness, but it's taking care of yourself so that you can take care of your child. But maybe, in that moment, people are frantic and they don't think that way. I think that's why they make that announcement, right? Just make sure that you have the mask on so you got the energy, you're conscious, and you can take care of your child. That's my understanding of that. So, so I think a parent would be doing this out of compassion and the wish to help their child, not out of selfishness. Okay, so tomorrow there's one more, the combined method. We'll just go through it quickly. I mean, we've already covered all the points, but it's a combination of the two methods that we've looked at, the 7-point and this one, and so there's also a way of combining them and getting the best of both. So we'll look at that tomorrow. And then I thought, too, to start looking at this text by Nagarjuna, the Dream Tale.